Delta 2648, descend and maintain 7,000.
Alright, descend to 7,000, Delta 2648.
Boy 3130, reduce speed to 210.
210 speed on board 3130.
Alright, United 887, approaching the bridge for 2 left.
United 887, San Francisco Tailwind, come, runway 2 left, third line.
2 left, third line, United 887.
Hey guys, SouthernAviator here, and in this video I want to talk to you guys about ETOPS. I'm going to try to offer up what knowledge of ETOPS that I have, in hopes that it will help some people out there that may be interested in it. For starters, I guess I'll give the definition. ETOPS is extended twin operations, and basically it's intended for twin engine airplanes. Or two engine airplanes, and ETOPS is when you are more than 60 minutes flying time on a single engine from a adequate or suitable airport. Okay, so for example, if you're flying a 777, which I often fly, that is 465 nautical miles. So that said, if I am more than 460, all of a sudden I can't talk. If you are more than 465 nautical miles from an airport, you have now entered ETOPS, and you have to be, you have to have a legal flight plan for that, as it's said in the real world. So I have a British Airways flight from London Heathrow to Narita. In the real world, I understand that this is British Airways flight number 5, and I'm using this as an example for a specific reason, because if you look, this flight really never gets more than an hour of flying time from land, and also this flight does have an ETOPS segment, and the ETOPS segment would not even occur anywhere near over water. Now, I say that with a caveat because there could be airports all along your route, but that does not mean you can use those airports. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of information in the real world, if you guys out there may not be aware of it. An airline has to, or should I say, can only use airports that are in its operation specifications, or at least that's the way it is in the United States. And what that means is the governing body over aviation in the US is the FAA, and the airline has to have approved airports by the FAA to use, and those airports are even aircraft specific. And so let me try to go into what that means. Let's see, what's an example I could use real quick. Okay, so let's pretend that United Airlines is operating into Brussels, Belgium. All right, so Brussels, Belgium is right here, and let's say it wants to use Amsterdam as an alternate for planning this. So let's say they're planning it with the 777. Okay. If they're going to use Amsterdam as the alternate, then Amsterdam has to be listed in the ops specs for United Airlines in order for them to list it as an alternate. If it's not listed in the ops specs, then it cannot be listed as an alternate. All right, that's an example of what I'm saying. This airport, I have no idea what airport this is. Okay, Rotterdam. If Rotterdam is not in the ops specs for a 777, it cannot be listed as an alternate, not legally anyway. All right, but let's say they're planning it with the 787 going to Brussels. And let's say for the 787, Amsterdam is listed in the ops specs, or Rotterdam, whichever one. Then they could list it as an alternate and be completely legal. So that's my point, is you can't just use any airport you want in the real world. You can only use airports in that airline's ops specs. Hope I'm clear on that. I hope I didn't confuse you anymore. So that's what I mean by that. It has to be in the ops specs, and that's even more broken down into what's referred to as refueling airports, alternate airports, provisional airports, regular airports. All right, so those four, basically all four of those can be listed as an alternate. But there's one type of airport that if it's listed only as this particular type, you cannot use it as an alternate of any kind, and that's emergency airports. All right, so if an airport is an emergency airport, it can't be listed as a destination alternate. Like, if you're planning to Brussels and you want to use Amsterdam, if Amsterdam were an emergency airport only, it couldn't be listed as an alternate airport. You can only list it in an ETOPS scenario. And that's why I'm speaking of it, because in an ETOPS scenario, you can list an emergency airport as an ETOPS alternate, because obviously you're going to be going there in an emergency anyway. So that's the idea behind that. Maybe that's more information than some people care to hear, but I'm just trying to detail out what I understand of it, because it's really, it can be a complex issue planning these flights correctly. So I'm using London as an example, so I'm just going to go here to plan flight. And if I check suitable airports, or adequate airports, I should say, maybe I got to go to the ETOPS thing to get it to show. There we go. So PFPX is giving me all these airports. Now, here's the op specs that I use. All right, I don't know why it's black there. There we go. So here's the op specs airports that I use. Okay, let me zoom out a bit. Forgive me here. Oh, that's too far. All right, there we go. So, and it's covering the area of the world where I'm going to be doing this British Airways flight from London to Narita. So all these little red dots here, or whatever tags, these are the airports that I use. Now, since I consider this to be the op specs airports for me as far as flight simulator is concerned, I would only use these airports. Okay, so let me refresh here, because something not showing up that should be. Just bear with me here a second. All right, so moving on. All right, so what I was getting at is these are my airports that I can list as alternates. And notice how there's not a whole lot of airports over Russia. Go figure. But if I check my emergency airports, suddenly a few more becomes available to me. All right, see, so this one and this one for an example. So I couldn't list them as an alternate, but I can list them as an ETOPS alternate because it's an emergency airport. So I'm trying to hammer this home, and I hope I'm not boring you to death with this, but I hope you kind of get what I'm trying to get at here. So I would click emergency airports, and I can use any of these airports en route. If you go back to PFPX, for example, this airport is not in my op specs, so I cannot list it for an ETOPS airport. So here's the airports that I would use that keep me within range and are listed in my op specs. All right. Now, if you look, you'll see, let me check this. There we go. Here's the airports, and I have a gap right here that I can't cover because I don't have an airport to take care of that gap. This gap right here is too big, and I can't get within range. So now I have to plan an ETOPS segment because of that. Even though it's a very small, ETOPS segment, it's very quick. I'd probably be through it in less than an hour. But it is an ETOPS segment that I would have to plan for. And also notice it is not over water. It is over land. So that's kind of what I was getting at, is it's not about water at all. It's about distance from suitable airports that are within that airline's op specs. All right, so I hope I've drilled that home enough for those that may not be aware of that. So I would have to cover this segment. So real quick, I could, ETOPS 90, I could go with that. I could list UERR for one and then the other. So the equal time airports between these two, that's why I listed that way. These two airports are going to be equal time airports. And I'll get more into what I mean by equal time in a second if you don't already know. So now I got this 90-minute overlap here. And, you could do 120 minutes. That's what 120 means. 120 minutes. Probably already knew that, but I'm going to say it just in case. And now I have this overlap. So now if I planned it, the flight planner would give me an equal time point, and it would cover that area, and my ETOPS airports would be these particular airports. So that's that's a scenario where even though you are over land, you still have an ETOPS segment. All right, so let's see, where do I want to go with this next? I'll also talk about this. Well, I guess I proved my point, I guess, with this airport. So I'm going to go to something that people are more familiar with ETOPS, and those are flights going over the North Atlantic. A lot of people fly these routes, so I'm going to try to at least do something that people are familiar with, maybe to help people understand a little bit better. So keeping everything that I've originally said in mind, this would be an ETOPS segment because we have a segment here where we don't have adequate airports. So you can use, let's see, JFK, because this flight's going JFK to Paris. So JFK, oops, can't type. Then another one could be is CYT, so that's a little bit too far. And if you're wondering how to edit your rings, because I don't know if I have this listed in here right for this aircraft, it's down here. So yeah, 465 is in there. Okay, so I need something a little bit bigger. So I guess I can go to Halifax, CYZ, then go to Gander. All right, and the next airport I have that's in range, I guess, would probably be Shannon. All right, so now we end up with that, and I'll overlay the nat tracks here. So I would have to plan an ETOPS segment for this because I don't have another airport that's close enough. All right, and if you want to take a peek at the ETOPS airports I have for that area, oh goodness gracious, it's all over the place. All right, there we go. You can see here this large gap I have, and so you have the Azores here and Keflavik up here, but you're not in range. So I had to plan for that. So I guess the simplest thing you can do is just put 180 minutes between it, and then put YQX and Shannon. All right, so now I have nice overlays here, so the equal time point is probably going to be somewhere in here. So I'm going to go grab a route, just let it make me one, I guess. Just something quick. I don't need anything too elaborate, just want to make the vid here. So gave me track X, that's fine. You know, using track X, since it's so far south, you probably could end up doing an ETOPS 120. So I'll probably go LPLA and then LPLA to Shannon. Let's see if that will work. Yeah, so I would use 3 airports here, and the reason why is because 120 is closer than 180. So there's nothing wrong with having airports that are even closer to you in case you have to divert. So I would have 2 equal time points on this, one between Gander and the Azores and one between the Azores and Shannon. So moving on, let's fill in some of this stuff here. So to give me a flight plan, let's just throw something in there for extra time. Alternates, let's just go with, I don't know, what's the close airport over there? I don't know, Brussels, since it's on my mind from earlier. And now let's calculate it and see what it does. Well, I guess I need a payload too, don't I, just to make it make sense. So let's just go with 400,000 with 0 fuel weight. All right, and now let's calculate that. Okay, guys, finally got it to calculate a flight plan. I'll throw this in there real quick. I ended up pausing the recording because when I hit calculation, it would not calculate it with track X. I don't know why. When I tried to do it with track X, it just froze up PFPX. I don't understand why. So I switched to track W, and I don't know if you noticed that or not, but just letting you know why. For some reason, it will not calc track X. But whatever. I guess no big deal. I can still get to the same point. All right, so getting back to the ETOPS. So now I want you to notice that it planned an equal time point 1 and an equal time point 2. If you go back to the ETOPS segment, you'll see equal time point airports number 1 was between, oh, and also I changed it from Gander to St. John's, so that's why you see CYYT in there. So anyway, so the equal time point between St. John's and the Azores, okay, that's these 2 airports, is right here. All right, this point here. At this point, the flight planner has determined that you are, in flying time, not distance, time, okay? you're at an equal time point between St. John's and the Azores. So before hitting equal time point 1, if you were to have an emergency, obviously as in losing an engine, you would go back to St. John's, because you know it's quicker to get to St. John's than it is to get to the Azores, all right, which is over here. But if you're past equal time point 1, okay, and not yet to equal time point 2, then you would go to the Azores. Once you reach equal time point 2 and you pass it, then you're going to Shannon. That's what this means, okay? And that's the point of it, is to let you know where you are and which airport is closest to you. Now, I'll throw this out there. Just because you plan these airports does not mean you have to use them. This is a plan, not necessarily what you'll do if you were en route and something were to go wrong. If you were en route and something were to go wrong, and just so happens to be that another airport is available to you, especially in an engine out scenario, it might be an airport that's not even in your op specs like we talked about before, but a captain has what is called in the United States, I don't know what it's called else places, emergency authority. And if the captain feels that it's safer for him to land at an airport that is not in his op specs, he very well can do it. But for planning purposes, pre-flight planning, you cannot plan an airport that's not in the op specs, like I, beat over the head earlier. So for the planning purposes, that's what these equal time points are all about. All right, so that's that. So now I'm going to add in this wrinkle, the icing. So if you turn on icing, what that means is if you lose an engine, but not only did you lose an engine, you're in an area where your flight levels off, because if you're at 30-something thousand feet and you lose an engine, you're not going to stay at 30-something thousand feet. You're not going to have the power to do so. So you're going to do what's called drift down to a drift down altitude. And that drift down altitude, it can vary depending on the weight of the airplane, depending on the atmospheric conditions, whether you're ISA plus 510 or minus 510, whatever the performance is going to be for that scenario. And let's say that drift down altitude is 12,000 feet. Well, I guess that doesn't matter. The point is, if you're going to encounter icing trying to get to your ETOPS alternate, then you've got to turn ETOPS icing on, because that matters with the performance. Because let's say you're not over water. In this case, we're over water, but let's just pretend you're not over water. You're over mountains, and the mountains are 10,000 feet high, but you're so heavy that on one engine, and on that one engine, you're trying to anti-ice the airplane, because a part of that power is robbed from the engine and bled off to supply anti-ice. Then you have to know that you're able to clear those mountains. And that's what these are, your grid mores. You can go up here and turn this on, and that's what that's all about. So for example, this grid more, this little square right here, is telling me that the highest terrain in this box is 10,000 feet. So I would need to know that I can clear 10,000 feet if I need to get to where I'm headed. And if I'm too heavy, and not only am I too heavy, I've got to turn anti-ice on top of that, because there's icing conditions out there, then I may not be able to clear that 10,000 feet. And that's where anti-icing is important. That's why we have to account for that when we're planning a ETOPS or emergency situation. So that's what these grid mores are about. That's what that's telling. And actually, I misspoke. It's not that your highest terrain is 10,000 feet. Excuse me. What it means is that this number is telling you that you can clear the highest terrain by 2,000 feet. So the highest point should be 8,000 feet. So your grid more, or your lowest altitude you can fly, is 10,000, because you have to clear the terrain. So that's what that means. So in any case, moving right along, that's what that's all about. Now I want to also talk about APU burn. Now in PFPX, you can click this on. This right here. And if you do that, it's going to take the fuel burn per hour on that particular aircraft that you're flying or planning, and it's going to apply it to the burn. And it's going to assume that you're going to burn your APU for the entire flight. The reason why I'm talking about this is because when you lose an engine, you lose a generator. And in aviation, we're all about redundancy. So if you lose a generator because you've lost an engine, you still need to have two. You still need to have a backup, where your backup now becomes your APU. So if you were to get en route out here and you were to lose an engine, you're going to turn on the APU to give you a secondary electrical source, because at that point you're only using the other engine for your electrical source. You can't turn on your APU typically, you know, in higher altitudes. You have to drift down to a lower altitude to start it. But the reason why I'm talking about this is because you wouldn't turn this on for the entire route. And let's just look at this particular airplane. I think the burn's like 500 an hour or something like that. Where is it? Yeah, APU burn, 595 pounds an hour, almost 600 pounds an hour. So if I were flying along and this flight took, you know, 10 hours or whatever, that's going to be a lot of fuel. That's a waste. You don't need all that. So you're only going to plan it for the ETOPS portion of it. So you would have to figure out what's the time en route between your ETOPS entry, which would be right here when you get past this 60-minute ring, and your ETOPS exit when you're past this 60-minute ring. Okay? So this portion in the middle is where you're in ETOPS, all right? And that's where you would want to figure out your APU burn if you were to get out there and have to have that. So you would just take, you know, 595 pounds and multiply it by, you know, however many hours you're going to be in the air for the ETOPS segment, and then you would take that and you would put it into your contingency fuel in pounds. All right, you would place that right there, and that's fuel that you have to take at takeoff. Can't go without it. So that's that. I feel like I'm getting to some very complicated stuff. I don't know, maybe this video is dragging along, so forgive me if I'm talking long or talking about something you don't care to hear, but I'm really trying to lay out what ETOPS really is all about as far as real world planning. But I want to cater this as much as I possibly can to Flight Simulator. Some people like to take it, you know, to as real as possible, and some people don't. So I want to give the information to those people that want to try to utilize it, you know, to make it that much more realistic if that's what they desire. So anyway, that's pretty much. I mean, really can't think of anything else that will go into it. Well, I guess the one last thing I can think of is weather. As a matter of fact, if you go to results that I got on this last one, this is your EROP section or your emergency section. So it tells you right here, ETOPS entries at Moncton 127 nautical miles prior to 4740 north, and it tells you that it's roughly an en route time when you get 2 hours and 40 minutes in flight. So you really could use this as an easy way to figure out how long you're going to be en route if you want to use that to calculate your APU burn. All right, so also ETOPS alternates weather and NOTAM suitability period. I don't know if anybody uses NOTAMs when they're playing Flight Simulator or not, but if you do use NOTAMs, and I'm going to assume that means you already know how to use the NOTAM, so I'm not going to go into that. But for weather, when you have an airport as an alternate, it has to meet what's called alternate minimums, and those are weather requirements. Deriving alternate minimums probably would be a completely separate video altogether. So I'll just tell you this. I try to use airports that have at least 1,000 feet ceiling in their forecast and at least 3 statute miles. That's VFR, and it makes me feel like there's a safe buffer so that if the forecast is wrong, at least it won't be so far off that it now goes below your category 1 minimums, which is typically 200.5 more often than not. So I want to buffer in there. I want to make sure those airports really will be available to me. I wouldn't list an airport that is, you know, got 400 feet, you know, overcast or broken ceiling and 1 statute mile visibility forecasted, because forecasters are wrong. They don't always get it right. And if they're wrong on the wrong side of that, if it ends up being, you know, 100 feet ceiling and, you know, half a statute mile, a quarter mile, then that airport might not be available to me because the TAF is what we call busted. It's a busted TAF. The forecasters just got it wrong. So you want a buffer in there. So I try to stay away from airports that are less than 1,000 feet and 3 statute miles. The only time I would use airports that are lower than that if I'm forced into it. And what I mean is, let's say I'm planning and this entire region is just horrible. All right. And I mean, basically all the airports that are within range of my aircraft in an ETOPS scenario, it's like the weather just sucks. And I can't find anything in my outspecs that's got weather above 1,000 feet, 3 statute miles. Then I'm going to start digging a little further, trying to find an airport that is above alternate mins, and is also above my plate mins for the ILS approaches for Cat 1. So consider your weather and make sure that it is suitable. So when you're looking at this Moncton, you know, from 0458Z till 622Z, it's telling you that that's the time period in which you will need St. John's to be available to you, and that's the time period you need to make sure the weather and the NOTAMs are going to be good, and so you can feel that airport will be available airport if you end up needing it. Same for the Azores, same for Shannon. That's what these times mean, that they're within range of these equal time points, and that's what you need to make sure they're available to you. So weather is also a factor. You don't want to just plan any airport if the weather is all crappy and foggy and whatever else. You don't want to use that. I guess that's about it. I hope that wasn't I don't know, if too hard or too much information. You know, I don't know, everybody's different in what they want to take into their sim. But hopefully if you're a guy that's hard-nosed, hardcore, and you want to be as, you know, as realistic as you can be, then maybe some of this stuff will be more, you know, usable to you. And if you're a guy that just wants to kind of, you know, keep it kind of basic, you know, you want to do ETOPS, but you don't want to get into all the real critical or, you know, mundane issues of it, maybe this video will help you as well, you know. But at any case, thank you guys for watching, and hope you found it beneficial. Until next time, see ya.